The Book of Boba Fett was set up for failure from its start. But before I get into why I didn't like this show or one of the two shows within it, I want to recap what made Boba Fett such a standout character in Star Wars original trilogy. Ironically enough, Disney Plus released a 20 to 30 minute documentary on the creation and appeal of Boba Fett in the OT. That came out along with the first episode of Boba. I think this short documentary perfectly describes the appeal of Boba Fett, and I highly recommend you give it a watch. But the TLDR, besides the creation of the character, is that the appeal of Boba Fett was his cold-hearted, mysterious nature. He was a man of few lines, just a guy with a kick-ass mask. Now let's compare those character traits to the Boba Fett that we got in the show. This Boba Fett is oddly compassionate, has multiple lines, isn't mysterious, constantly takes off his helmet, and cleaned up his costume and wears a long skirt. Now, I understand some of those are minor nitpicks, and I also understand that a main character needs many lines of dialogue and has to be the center point of a show. I also realize that they are probably paying Tamir Morrison a lot of cash, so they want to have his face on screen as much as possible. But that's just it. Even in the Disney Plus documentary, all lines just connect to that one dot, that Boba Fett is not main character material. He was never meant to be the center point of a show, a movie, or anything of that matter. I was originally going to make this review episode by episode like how I did with Star Wars Visions. But looking back, I feel like the show is just conflicted with itself. It does not know what it wants to be. And this show, for me, just has two big parts. Part 1 being the first 4 episodes, Boba Fett and his backstory, and the final 3, catching up with the Mandalorian, and then the final battle episode. Judging by the title of this video, you could probably tell which one I dislike and which one I really enjoy. I think I speak for most, if not all, Star Wars fans here when I say that the final 3 episodes jumped in quality, and the 2 of those episodes don't even have our main character say a single line. For me, the weakest part of this show as a whole was its pacing. As stated before, I feel like this show is separated into 2 uneven halves, and I think that they both have pacing issues, but in the total reverse opposite ways. I feel all of Boba Fett's origin story and the present stuff just goes by extremely slow, and the first 2 episodes could definitely have been squished into one longer episode. I feel as if there are just many unnecessary scenes and developed plot lines that are deemed useless by the end of the finale. Now, I will admit, I did appreciate the Boba flashbacks. I thought his whole relationship / experience with the Tuskens was actually a really interesting concept to dive into. While I really feel it could have been executed better, I enjoy how it's a set plot line that pays off in the finale, unlike other things in the show. Did I think that there were too many flashbacks and there were many wasted scenes that could have been cut? Yes. But they do make Boba more human and give him that spot of vulnerability that main characters need. I'll be bringing that up in a lot in this video. But to be completely honest, everything that wasn't a flashback or Mandalorian, I was not invested in at all. I mean, I really like Fennec Shand, and I thought she was more of a badass than Boba Fett, but of all people. But she really doesn't have any character moments, though, and she really is just there to do the brawn work that Boba can't. She didn't need to be there. She wasn't bad or, wasn't unentertaining, but she didn't offer anything necessarily meaningful to the story. The characters that Boba Fett meets along his way of becoming a very weak daimyo are also very uninteresting. The Wookiee gets beaten up every time he gets in a fight, especially in the finale. The biker gang people do nothing except for one of them doing an unnecessary spin move. The governor's right-hand man is the most annoying little shit in the whole entire show, and anytime he talked, I couldn't stand it. I realize he's supposed to be annoying, that's, the part of his character, but it's just so annoying for the audience, not just the characters. The Gamorrean guards die off like little bitches to the townspeople, which is so hard to believe. And the Rancor, well, alright, the Rancor is pretty cool, but you see what I'm saying. Or if you don't, then you're just asking yourself, well, what am I trying to say here? I'm saying that besides the flashbacks and the Tusken stuff, all of this 4-episode intro is just unnecessary and could have been done without. None of the characters are interesting or provide any weight to the show as a whole. If this show was these 4 episodes and the finale episode, but without any tie into The Mandalorian, this show would probably be like a solid 3 out of 10 with nothing saving it. What a breath of fresh air, huh? Episodes 5 and 6 are literally just Mandalorian episodes, and I was all for it. When I say these 2 episodes hit it out of the park, I truly mean that. I mean, The Mandalorian is such an interesting character, and his inner conflict combating his care and want to follow the creed is so interesting, and the Darksaber being so heavy, symbolizing his heavy conflict, is so neat. It's a great decision on the writing team. And it's crazy for me to think that Jon Favreau really sat there, wrote 2 amazing episodes, and then also wrote those first 4. But I digress. I love this episode, specifically episode 5, so much, and catching up with Mando and the tease at the end of us getting to see Grogu again was great. If you stopped watching this show after episode 1, go and watch these. They are so great. So then episode 6 is a little weaker in my opinion, but still solid. It relies heavily on fanfare, but, though it's slow in parts, it picks up, and seeing Luke train Grogu parallel to how Yoda trained Luke, it was just so nice to see, and proves that the writing team does care. Like, why was so much care put here in these 2 episodes and not to the main character and his intro? It's mind-boggling. Overall, a solid episode, and seeing Ahsoka again was also really nice. I loved the end of the episode on how Luke gave Grogu a choice, and how in the finale he not only takes the Beskar, but we also don't see Luke again. I think it would have been a problem if these shows overused Luke, so I'm glad that he had enough screen time to just suffice. And then we get into the finale, and honestly, I can't say I didn't enjoy myself, but really, I don't think it was anything special. It wasn't tiring like the first 4 episodes of the series. I literally fell asleep during episode 3. But it ceased to really keep me invested unless it had to do with Mando or Grogu. My biggest complaint about this episode is how our protagonist just continued to get beaten up so harshly. It's hard for me to believe that a fearsome Wookiee and Gamorrean guards are just dying to townspeople. It's a really small thing that annoys me, and Chrysanthemum has to be taken to cover after beaten up twice. It's like they just reused the same scene. Everyone in this episode just feels like a punching bag, and I think the episode was uninspired overall. There were some good parts though, like I thought the Rancor, while cool, he literally just started destroying the whole city, which obviously is not a good thing, and probably only causes more problems and more issues for not just Boba Fett, but the governor and the mayor, and it's dumb. It's just a big explosion thing. My favorite part of this episode is probably the end when Fennec assassinated the mayor and all of the people in that shack. I really thought it was Boba Fett, and I was hoping it was Boba Fett, and I said to myself, finally, Boba Fett is doing something badass, and then, it was Fennec. Which is still fine, because I liked her character, and she was, very, very much absent from the finale. I feel like it fits for her, but I really think Boba still needed something of that caliber to prove that his character is understood. So I was going to go a lot more in depth on the finale, but honestly, I just think it's meh. It's very cliche and predictable. The standoff with Cad and Boba, I feel, was also a highlight of this episode, and I really liked how it was done. I am disappointed, though, that they brought Cad Bane into the show just to kill him off. Well, that's also assuming he's dead. Nonetheless, I really liked the dialogue exchange between Cad and Boba here. I liked how Cad, mentioned everything from Jango to the Tuskens, and even how Boba has grown soft in his old age. Cad Bane is like 70 years old, he's all shriveled up, and he's just still being a badass, and he really shows that Boba is just not. Cad Bane acknowledging this here does prove that the writers know how Boba Fett is supposed to be, or how he was. And I'm glad that in the show, the characters also realized that, okay, this is out of character for this guy, what is going on? I still don't believe that it was the right way to go with the character, but at least it's acknowledged. I liked how Boba won with what he learned from the Tuskens compared to his blaster. It was one of the few setups that had a satisfying conclusion. Episodes 5 and 6 easily average out this show to an 8.59 out of 10. And then adding this episode on top, I would give this second half 3 episodes around an 8 out of 10. And I would say that brings the whole show to a whopping like 5-ish, maybe 6-ish out of 10. A bad show that was set up for failure since its beginning, and its only good episodes were the ones without the title character. Okay, so now the review on the Book of Boba Fett is over, but what I wanted to do is provide what I think is a fix to how this show could have been done better. Now, we're going to do a hypothetical here. So, we're going to replace Boba Fett with anybody in the Star Wars universe, right? Let's pretend like this show was about Jabba, or, anyone in the place of the daimyo of Tatooine. This show could have been the exact same, except with Bib Fortuna's name slapped on it, and I promise you, no one would care. The only reason I feel this show even made Star Wars fans bat an eye was because Boba Fett was in the title. This show is honestly the same way I feel about Loki, and I know that's a very popular one, but I have a pretty negative opinion on it. Yes, I know that there are obviously the other Lokis, and that it's supposed to be a learning experience for the character, but he's dead. And yes, I also know that it's supposed to strike that state of vulnerability, like I mentioned before. But in the end, it could have been anybody in that multiversal, in that multiversal situation. It's still, the multiverse still would have been shattered, and the TVA still could have been introduced. And that's also how I feel about the Book of Boba Fett. It's like the best episodes didn't have Boba in it, and that speaks loudly. This easily could have been Mando Season 3. This easily could have been the first 3 or maybe 4 episodes of Mando Season 3. And with that being said, hear me out. This is how I feel episode 1 of The Mandalorian Season 3 would play out. And this is assuming that Book of Boba Fett didn't happen. Okay, so episode 1 is a carbon copy of Boba episode 5. So none of those first 4 episodes, and the first episode is just Boba Fett Season 5, Boba Fett episode 5 all the way through. We catch up with Mando, and then we're teased the Boba Fett at the end. So Fennec Shan being a cameo would actually work instead of one of the main characters in the show coming in as the end. Whatever, but you know what I'm trying to say. So, you'd get an instant teaser right at the end of the episode. If the episode wasn't great, Star Wars fans are hyped because now Boba Fett's coming back. That's sick. And then with that in mind, you still have, this huge war with Mando, a badass Boba, Fennec Shand, a Rancor. It all sounds so cool. And that would only be episode 2. But then at the end, we'll hear Mando say that he has to visit an old friend. And then again, we'll get episode 2, which will be a carbon copy of episode 6. Just all the way through with all the Luke stuff, and it would just be great. So now episode 3. It's the beginning half of Boba episode 7. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to split Boba episode 7 into 2 parts. So when Mando, Fennec, and Boba are in that hut keeping watch. So everything that happened in that episode pre that little scene when they're in the hut can happen. And then right when they're in the hut, I want to change the dialogue, change the scene a little bit. So then it's, instead of them talking and, the mayor guy doing his thing outside, I want a conversation to spark, and then you'll get the Cliff Notes version of Boba's backstory, from him escaping the Sarlacc to his time with the Tuskens, to set in that vulnerability spot for Boba. Now, obviously, it would be very summed up, it would be very rushed, and would not provide the same emotional weight as it does in the Book of Boba, but it still works, as he isn't the main character. I think it would make sense for Boba to hide his emotions here. He isn't a kid anymore. He took after his father, and he's still continuing to be this badass that we all love. This episode would end here, finishing kind of with the murder of the Tusken tribe, and then we would go back to reality in episode 4. this would be the final battle. This would be the second half of Boba Episode 7. But without all the extra useless characters like the Wookiee and the Gamorrean guards and the biker people, just Baby Yoda, Boba, Mando, and Fennec versus an army. And I'm going to change something here. I think that it would be best that the last scene with Mando and Grogu flying off would be the penultimate scene, which is the second to last scene. And then I think after they speed off, you'll get a little, one of those classic George Lucas Star Wars, just slide across the screen transitions, and then it would be the Cad and Boba standoff. Why do I feel like this works? So here, the vulnerability set up in the previous episode for Boba will be resolved. He'll take down Cad Bane using what he learned from the Tuskens, a classic example of cause and effect, classic example of a satisfying enough conclusion of a 2-episode long story arc. Then the season would continue on with no more Boba, and episode 5 and through would just be whatever Mando season 3 has in store. So why do I think that this would work better than Boba Fett? Or the Book of Boba Fett? Well, it's a well-paced, fun adventure for both Mando and Boba. It would have the same exact conclusion for Boba Fett and Mandalorian without the whole 4-episode filler from the start of Boba Fett. Boba Fett will still remain the daimyo, and that's awesome. And, whether he's a righteous or ruthless leader, I think that would be best as it's up to in the interpretation of the viewer. It would keep Boba Fett the same character that Star Wars fans have loved since 1980.